Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with the Cornish Pasty. That's right, this amazing meat pie hails from Cornwall, England. Which reminds me, why is this not called Cornwallish pasty? I'm going to need an explanation for that. But regardless, this is an incredibly versatile crust and a technique that any good cook should know, especially ones partial to meat pies. So let's go ahead and get started with the dough, and for that we're going to need some bread flour. You can use all-purpose, although if you can, try to use bread flour. It does work a little better here. We're also going to throw in some salt, and then of course we're going to need some fat. So I'm going to toss in some lard, and I know, everybody's health conscious these days and watching their diets, but don't worry, we're also going to add butter. And at this point we're going to take our wire pastry blender, also known as a pastry cutter, and work that fat into the flour. And yes, you can do this with your fingertips, but this tool does make life a little easier. So we're going to work that mixture with our pastry cutter until we basically have like a coarse, crumbly mixture. And when you've gone far enough, it should look something like this. So that looks good. And then it's time for the last ingredient. So we'll make a little well in the middle and we'll pour in some ice water. And then the plan here is we're going to mix this with a fork until it just starts to come together. And then we'll switch and finish it by hand. All right, so give that a mix with your fork until it gets annoying to stir. Then clean off the fork and switch to your hands. And as soon as it feels like you can start wadding that into a ball of dough, we're going to transfer that to our work surface. And this is where things are going to get a little weird. So far, this has basically been standard pie crust making procedure. And if we were making pie, at this point we would gently shape this into a ball of dough without overworking it. But we're not doing pie crust. Okay, for this pasty crust, we're actually going to need this for a couple minutes. I know it sounds crazy. All right, the Cornish pasty is minor food. So think of this crust as more like an edible lunchbox that protected their meat and vegetables. So that's why we want to give this a couple minutes of kneading. So we end up with a crust that's a little more sturdy. And by the way, sturdy does not mean tough. As you'll see, this is not a tough crust at all. But it does need to stand up to that filling and be fairly durable. In fact, the old joke is a proper Cornish pasty should survive a fall down a mine shaft without breaking. Now, unfortunately, I can't test mine. I've been asked to stop visiting the local mine shafts. But the point is, you pie makers do not be concerned about this step. It is very necessary, okay? And during this couple minutes of kneading, the heat from your fingers is going to melt some of that lard, which is going to incorporate into the dough. And after working it for about 2 minutes, you should have something that looks pretty smooth. So I'm going to stop right here. That's looking very good. And at this point, we're going to go ahead and wrap that in plastic and chill thoroughly before working with this. All right, at least a few hours or overnight. And of course, while you're waiting for your dough to chill, that's the perfect time to make your filling. Which, by the way, I was going to do as a separate video, but it's so simple I decided to shoehorn it in here, and then I'll fill in the blanks on the blog post. But I'm going to go with a very traditional filling of steak. That's some diced skirt steak, some onion, some potato, and some turnip. And besides seasoning this with some salt, freshly ground black pepper, and cayenne, that's it. So an extremely simple filling, and please take note, everything's raw. That's one of the secrets to this dish. And that's going to be enough filling for 4 very nicely sized pasties. Okay, so our filling's done, our dough is chilled, and it's time for final production. So we're going to go ahead and take our thoroughly chilled dough, cut it into 4 equal pieces, and then we'll take one of those pieces and shape it with our hands into something sort of round. As you'll see, it doesn't have to be perfect. There is extra dough here to work with. And using just enough flour so it doesn't stick, we're going to roll that out to about 8 inches wide, about 1/8 of an inch thick, maybe just a hair thicker than 1/8 of an inch. So that's what I did here. So that looks good. If you have any excess flour, just brush it off. And then before we fill this, we're going to have to do one very important step, the old egg wash. So we're going to take 1 egg that's been beaten with 1 teaspoon of water, and we're going to paint that all over the surface. No, not just where it seals, do the whole thing. That way you're covered, literally. And then once that's set, let's go ahead and pile on our filling. And we want to be very generous here. If you're not nervous about it being overstuffed, you're not putting enough in. So let's pile that up. And as you can see, it's off center because we need to fold over this dough. And then before we fold this, we want to top it with a couple slices of butter. A very key step, but easy to forget. So please take note, both mental and written. And at that point, we can fold over the dough and press it all the way around with our fingers to seal. And as long as you're not pressing filling exactly where it's going to seal, you're okay. So just go around. You should have plenty of extra dough to work with. And then once that's pressed firmly, we're going to go ahead and cut off the excess. So I'm going to take a little spin on the pizza cutter and go around with that. Of course a knife will work, but that's not how I roll. Okay, so we're going to remove that excess dough, and then we'll transfer that onto our lined baking sheet and begin to crimp. And I know in Cornwall they actually fold it over and crimp it all the way around like I usually do when you see me make pie. But I'm sorry, I prefer the fork crimp because it gives you a thinner, crisper edge. So that's just a matter of personal taste. I mean, you are the Miss Jackson, if you're nasty, of your Cornish pasty. So we're going to let you decide. Like I said, I prefer the fork. But anyway, once those are crimped, we're going to go ahead and take the fork and stick it right down in the top so that the steam has somewhere to escape while these are baking. And yes, usually a little bit of juice will run out of that and kind of caramelize onto your pan. That's okay. Better that than the bottom or the side splitting. And at this point, these are 1 egg wash away from going in the oven. So let's make sure our oven is preheated to 350, and we'll take the rest of our egg wash and paint these thoroughly. All right, Cornish pasties are not supposed to have tan lines, so make sure you cover the entire surface. I hate it when part of a pastry doesn't have egg wash on it. That's one of my roughly 375 culinary pet peeves. And once those are egg washed, we're going to pop those into the center of a 350-degree oven for about an hour, or until they look like this. They should be beautifully golden. There should be steam and juices escaping from the holes on the top, and depending on your filling, should smell amazing. And technically you can eat these anytime, but they're probably way too hot right now. So I'm going to pop those on a rack to cool for at least 5 or 10 minutes. I know I hate to wait, but what I hate more are 3rd-degree burns on the roof of my mouth. So I let mine sit for a few minutes, and at that point your Cornish pasty is done. By the way, this thing is the original. Actually, I shouldn't give the brand name. This thing is the original rhymes with not sprockets. That was based on this. Guess which one I think you're going to like better. But anyway, let me cut this thing open for the official taste test. But first, I got to get rid of this thyme. It was not used in the recipe. Why did I garnish with it? That was a horrible mistake. Never do that. But anyway, let me cut into this and go in for the full frontal. And what makes this so amazing is the combination between that crisp, flaky outer crust and the moist, tender inner crust that's basically been steamed with all those delicious meat and vegetable juices. Just a perfect combination of taste and textures. And like I said earlier, while this is sturdier from the kneading, it is not tough at all. It is still very tender, very light, and just a fantastic bite of food. And then before we sign off, one bonus piece of footage. Let's say for the sake of argument, you can't wait for your pie to cool down. No problem, just cut it in half and pour cold cream in it before you bite it. Not only will that prevent you from burning your mouth, it's cream. It's going to make everything even richer and more delicious. So just a little extra trick I learned from my friends in Cornwall. But anyway, whether you eat them straight out of the oven or let them cool down a little bit, I really hope you give these Cornish pasties a try soon. So head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.